There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a crowd when something beautiful walks into a room. Not quiet. Not hush. Silence. The kind where 300 people simultaneously forget what they were saying mid-sentence and just stop. I was standing about 40 feet from the entrance of the ballroom at Buckingham Palace, wedged between a woman in a green fascinator who smelled like Chanel No. 5 and a retired diplomat from somewhere Nordic who kept adjusting his cufflinks, and I was holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched because I was too busy trying to find a good angle to see the king's arrival procession. That was the plan. That was what everyone was there for. King Charles. 75 years. A milestone birthday. The kind the palace doesn't let pass quietly. They'd been planning this evening for months. The guest list alone: officials, dignitaries, old friends of the crown, artists the king personally admires, representatives from charities he'd championed for decades before anyone gave him credit. It was a room full of people who each had their own story to tell about why they were standing there. The flowers alone were architectural. Great cascading columns of white roses and dusty blue hydrangeas climbing toward ceilings that were already doing too much on their own. The candlelight: actual candles, not electric imitations. Someone had made that decision and I respect them enormously. Turned everything amber and warm. And still, when she walked through that door, the room forgot itself. Let me back up. I'd arrived early, because I am the kind of person who arrives early to things and then immediately regrets it. You stand there too long. You watch the room fill. You make eye contact with too many strangers. You run out of polite conversation 3 times before the main event starts. The evening had begun at 6:30. The sky over London was doing that October thing, that bruised purple and grey thing it does when it can't decide between rain and theatre, and there was a chill coming in off the mall that no amount of formal dress could fully insulate against. I'd watched the arrivals from outside briefly, standing near one of the cordon sections where a small crowd of members of the public had gathered. Tourists. Londoners. People who'd heard something was happening and gravitated toward the lights and the cars and the faint sound of a military band warming up somewhere inside. There was a family from, I'm guessing, somewhere in the American Midwest, based on the father's jacket and the mother's running shoes worn with an otherwise formal outfit, the children pressed against the barriers with their phones up. A couple who appeared to be on a date and hadn't quite coordinated their outfits for the weather. An older woman standing completely alone, no phone in hand, no camera, just watching. Just watching with the kind of attention that makes you wonder what she knows that the rest of us don't. Cars arrived. Figures stepped out. Flashes of dark suits, of military medals catching the light, of women in long coats and jewels that probably had names and histories of their own. Every arrival got its reaction: a murmur, a ripple, phones lifting in unison. And then, the night did what it does when royalty is involved. It held its breath. I heard her before I saw her. Not her voice, she wasn't speaking yet. It was the crowd's response to her. A sound like a slow wave building. Not screaming, not the performative shrieking you get at concerts or football matches. Something more human than that. More involuntary. The sound of 300 people sucking in air at the same time. I turned. Pink. That's the first word that arrived in my brain, and it arrived as if someone had spoken it into my ear directly. Pink. But not any pink I had a word for. Not the soft apologetic pink of old wallpaper. Not the aggressive candy pink of a child's birthday party. Something between a blush and a flame. Something that in that amber candlelight looked almost alive, like the fabric itself was lit from underneath. The gown was. I am not a fashion writer, I want to be clear about this. I do not have the vocabulary for what I am about to attempt to describe. Floor length, structured at the top, with the kind of tailoring that only exists when a human being has stood still for hours while other human beings make something fit exactly their body and no other body in the world. There was detail at the shoulder. Something deliberate happening at the neckline. Nothing excessive. Nothing that competed with the person wearing it. Because the thing about the gown, the thing that doesn't make it into photographs, not really, is that it was designed to be second. The tiara was first. I've seen photographs of tiaras my whole life. We all have. They appear in magazines, in history books, in the kind of documentaries that run on Sunday afternoons and make you feel briefly educated. They are, objectively, remarkable objects. Old things. Loaded things. Things that carry more history in their settings than most buildings carry in their walls. But I had never stood 40 feet from one before. The tiara she wore that evening, I would learn later it had a name, a provenance, a story long enough to fill a separate book, caught the light in a way that I can only describe as greedy. Every candle in that ballroom, every lamp, every stray photographic flash from somewhere near the entrance, it took all of it. Bent it. Threw it back at you transformed. Diamonds do this. Old diamonds especially, cut in ways that modern precision can't quite replicate, do this thing where they seem to generate light rather than simply reflect it. The woman beside me, the Chanel No. 5 woman, made a sound I can only describe as involuntary. The Nordic diplomat with the cufflinks stopped adjusting them. And, the older woman outside, the one standing alone and, watching, I glanced back through the window somehow, some instinct made me look, she was smiling. Not at the spectacle. At something she recognized. Like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment and, here it finally, was. Here is something nobody tells you about very formal, very grand, very historically significant events. They are, for the first 40 minutes, mostly logistical. People find their places. Introductions happen. Small clusters of conversation form and dissolve and reform. There is a kind of choreography to it, not rehearsed, not rigid, but deeply practiced. The kind of social navigation that comes from decades of knowing exactly how to enter a room, greet the right person first without making the second person feel second, hold a glass in a way that looks relaxed, and listen to whoever is speaking with your whole face even if you've heard the same 4 topics circling the room all night. I am, for context, not particularly skilled at any of this. I found a position near one of the windows and stayed there, watching. It's what I do at parties I have no business attending. I stand somewhere with good sightlines and I watch and I try to figure out what is actually happening underneath all the decorum. What was actually happening that evening, the real current under the surface, was this: everyone in that room was watching Kate. Not rudely. Not openly. It wasn't the crass, rubbernecking stare you see at accidents or celebrity sightings on ordinary streets. It was subtler than that. Civilized. But unmistakable once you were looking for it. Conversations continued. People laughed at whatever was being said to them. Wine was drunk, canapés were consumed, the band played something understated and correct in the background. And, all the while, beneath all of it, eyes kept sliding. Following a point across the room. Tracking movement without appearing to track movement. It's a particular skill, that kind of watching. I saw it in the senior members of the household staff, the ones who've spent years learning to see everything without appearing to see anything. I saw it in the older guests, the ones for whom this world is not new, who have attended enough of these evenings to know that sometimes the real story is not in the speeches or the toasts but in the smaller, quieter moments between them. They were all watching Kate. She moved through that room like she'd been doing it since before she could fully remember. Which, in some sense, after all these years, all these hundreds of rooms, all these occasions, was probably not entirely untrue. But, here is what got me. Here is the thing I keep coming back to when I think about that evening. It wasn't the gown, as extraordinary as it was. It wasn't the tiara, which was extraordinary in a way that bypassed description and went straight to something more primordial, the understanding that beauty at that scale is also a kind of power. It was the way she was present. I've seen footage of people at events like this who are performing presence. Who are demonstrating, for the cameras and the witnesses and the historical record, that they are fully engaged, warmly enthusiastic, exactly as gracious as their position requires. You can clock the performance. There's a slight delay between the face and the feeling. A microfraction of a second where you can tell the response is being managed rather than lived. Kate was not performing. She was genuinely listening to whoever she was speaking to. And it showed in small, unmanaged ways, the slight forward lean when someone said something that interested her, the laugh that arrived a beat late and ran a beat long because it was real, the moments where she glanced away not from distraction but from the particular thoughtfulness of someone actually considering what they just heard before responding. She had a glass of something she barely touched. She never looked at it. She was entirely somewhere else. She was entirely there. About an hour into the evening, I ended up positioned near one of the long tables where guests had gathered for the first of several formal moments, a toast, I think, or the beginning of one, and I found myself standing at an odd angle, about 15 feet from where Kate was standing with a small group that included, if I'm remembering correctly, a woman I recognized as a long-standing patron of one of the children's charities Kate has worked with for years. They were in the middle of a conversation that had clearly been going on before I arrived anywhere near them. I couldn't hear most of it. But I caught, because the band had dipped in volume for just a moment, one of those chance acoustical gaps, Kate laughing at something the older woman said, and then saying something back that made the older woman put her hand over her mouth the way people do when they're genuinely surprised to be that delighted. And then Kate did something that I think about sometimes when I'm trying to explain to people who've never seen this, who only know the photographs, who only know the curated public image. She reached over and briefly squeezed the woman's arm. Not for the cameras. There were no cameras pointed at them in that moment. Not for the room. The room wasn't watching that particular corner. Just because she meant it. The tension I felt building that evening wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the tension of a scandal about to break or a confrontation about to erupt. It was gentler than that and, in some ways, more potent. It was the tension of watching someone carry something. I don't mean this in the intrusive way. I'm not reaching for details that aren't mine to speak to. What I mean is, there is a particular quality to people who have been through difficult things and come out the other side still standing, still present, still choosing to be fully in the room rather than somewhere behind glass. You recognize it when you see it. Something in the way they hold themselves. Not rigid. Not performed. Just considered. Deliberate in a way that suggests they know what it costs to be there and they've made peace with paying it. She wore that quality the same way she wore the tiara. Like she'd earned the right to it. Like it was hers. By the time the evening reached the point where King Charles made his entrance into the larger reception, and, I want to say, the room's response to him was extraordinary, warm in a way that felt personally felt rather than obligatorily rendered, a kind of love that surprised me a little in its openness. The dynamic had already been established. This was his night. His milestone. His 75 years. And she was there the way the right person is always there on those nights, not competing, not diminishing, not pulling focus in the way that would read as inappropriate or unkind, but present. Fully, luminously, undeniably present. The pink was still doing what it had been doing all evening. Catching light. Holding it. Giving it back changed. The tiara threw diamonds across the room. And, somewhere near the window, the Nordic diplomat with the cufflinks had, at some point without my noticing, stopped adjusting them entirely. He was just watching. We all were. There's a photograph from that evening. I've seen it reproduced in several places since. You've probably seen it too. It shows Kate in profile, the pink gown catching the light at a particular angle that makes the fabric look like something between silk and smoke, the tiara at that precise height where it reads as natural rather than theatrical, and she's looking slightly away from the camera, towards something off-frame, with an expression that is the hardest thing in the world to manufacture, genuine emotion, quietly held. People who saw that photograph and didn't attend the evening assumed it was staged. A careful setup. The right photographer positioned in the right spot, instructed to wait for a moment that had been pre-planned to look spontaneous. I was there. I can tell you what actually happened. It wasn't staged. It wasn't even particularly remarkable, as the raw sequence of events goes. What happened was this: King Charles, during a quieter moment between the formal toasts and the beginning of the dinner seating, crossed the room to where Kate was standing. He was moving through a kind of informal circuit, this thing that royals do at these events, a gradual drift through the room that lets them cover ground without it looking like they're working, and he reached her, and there was a brief exchange between them, and then he did something small. He said something to her that made her look away for just a moment. Just a second. Just away. Toward nothing in particular. Toward whatever the middle distance holds when you're trying to keep something in. And then, she looked back at him and smiled and said something back, and he laughed, a real laugh, a caught-off-guard laugh, and that was it. The moment was over. 12 seconds, maybe. They moved on. The room moved on. But that photograph caught the away look. That 1 second. And, because the photographer, whoever they were, they deserve recognition I cannot give them because I never got a name, had the instinct and the positioning and the discipline to wait for exactly that, the world got to see the thing that most people in that room missed. A person, in the middle of a ceremony, in the middle of being witnessed by hundreds of eyes, who was briefly and completely herself. I've thought about what he might have said. I have no idea. I'm not speculating and I'm not inventing. I don't know, and it isn't my business to know. What I know is the quality of the response, not the content. And the quality was, it mattered to her. Whatever was said, it landed somewhere real. Not in the formal receiving compliments space, the gracious acknowledgement space, the I've heard this and it means well space. In the place where things that actually matter to you land. Somewhere with weight. She looked away. Kept it in. Looked back. Smiled, but the smile came after the keeping it in, and that order of operations was the whole story. Later in the evening, after the seating and the formal dinner and the moment where the room sang, they sang, all of them, and there is something about several hundred people singing in unison that bypasses every layer of cynicism you've spent years building and goes straight to the part of you that is still, against all evidence, a hopeful animal. After all of that, there was a more relaxed period. The kind that follows formal dinners when the room exhales and people start moving again and the conversations get easier and more genuine. I ended up near the entrance to one of the side rooms, and I watched Kate for a while, not in the way I'd been describing, not from a distance of 40 or 60 feet, but from maybe 20, which in that context felt suddenly much closer. She'd been on her feet for hours. I noticed this not because she showed it, she didn't, or not in ways that read as exhaustion or complaint, but because I happened to be watching when she shifted her weight, once, in a way that I recognized as the particular bodily negotiation of someone in formal heels who has been standing on marble for longer than any shoe was designed to accommodate. One small shift. Barely visible. Back to stillness. In that tiara. In that gown. With the remainder of the evening still ahead. There's a word I've been searching for it the whole time I've been writing this, for the particular quality of something that is both delicate and immovable. Things that look like they might break and somehow don't. Things that are beautiful precisely because they are also, underneath, made of something harder than they appear. I don't know if that word exists in English. But I watched her that evening and I felt the shape of it. The concept. Whatever that word is. She was it. The pink gown. The tiara that hoarded light and distributed it like it was making decisions. The 12-second away look that a photographer was in the right place to catch. The arm squeeze that nobody was watching. The one weight shift in hours of standing. All of it was the same thing. All of it was the same word. King Charles danced that night. Briefly, informally, to something the band played that seemed to genuinely delight him, while a small circle of guests watched and applauded. He looked, and I mean this entirely warmly, like a man who was having a birthday party. Not a state occasion. Not a ceremony. A birthday party. 75 years. Arrived at. Survived to. Celebrated with. And, across the room, Kate was watching him the way family watches, not the performed attentiveness of obligation but the real thing. The complicated warm private thing that doesn't have a name either, the look you give someone you love watching them be happy. She raised her glass. Barely. Just enough. Evenings like that one don't end. They disperse. There's no clean finale, no curtain, no moment where someone claps their hands and declares it finished. People begin to leave and the way tides recede gradually, in small groups, the room losing its density over the course of an hour until the space that felt impossibly full at 8 o'clock feels gently, warmly emptied by midnight. I was near the end of the later guests, not because I was invited to linger but because I'd lost track of time in the way I sometimes do in rooms that are worth being in, and by the time I pulled myself toward the exit, the flower arrangements had lost some of their earlier perfection, a few petals released to the floor, one column of hydrangeas listing slightly to the left, and the candles had burned into themselves, their flames lower and more intimate than they'd been at the start. The Chanel No. 5 woman was long gone. The Nordic diplomat, too. The American family outside the barriers, I thought about them as I walked back down toward the gates, had surely gone back to wherever they were staying, with photographs on their phones that would look exactly like photographs, would fail to hold what it actually felt like to be standing in that October air watching a door open and a room catch its breath. Photographs always fail that. That's not a criticism of photographs. That's just the thing they can't do. Outside, on the mall, the city had continued being a city throughout the entire evening, indifferent to what was happening inside those walls. Buses. A couple arguing quietly near a bench. A man walking a dog that appeared deeply invested in a particular lamppost. The purple-gray October sky had made its decision in favor of light rain, the kind that's barely rain, the kind that's more like the air being damp and thoughtful. I stood there for a minute. I do this sometimes after experiences I want to hold on to. I just stand. Give it a second before the phone comes out, before the practical business of getting home begins, before the evening starts its slow process of becoming a memory rather than a thing that is still happening. And I thought about the photograph. The away look. The 12 seconds. I thought about the arm squeeze no camera caught. I thought about one weight shift on marble and heels, after hours, in a tiara, with more evenings still to go. I want to say something here, and I want to say it carefully, because it's the kind of thing that's easy to say badly. We project a lot onto public figures. We decide who they are based on fragments, photographs, headlines, moments stripped of context and fed into whatever narrative we already believe. We flatten them. We make them symbols. We make them stand for things that have nothing to do with who they actually are and everything to do with what we need them to represent. I don't know Kate. I spent one evening in the same building as her. I watched from distances that ranged from 40 feet to 15. I caught no private conversations, heard no confidences, have no particular insight into who she is when the room isn't watching. What I have is this: one evening. One room. One woman in pink, in a tiara that stole every photon it could reach. And the specific, unperformed quality of her presence in that room. Which I keep coming back to. Which felt like the whole point. The morning after, the photographs were everywhere. The pink gown on every front page, every feed, every entertainment website that had a correspondent inside. The tiara caught a dozen times from a dozen angles, each one somehow failing to capture what it actually looked like from inside the room, in person, with your own eyes, in candlelight. There were think pieces, inevitably. Fashion analyses. Historical breakdowns of the tiara's origins and its previous wearers and what the choice of it signified. Commentary on the pink, its symbolism, its deliberateness, its statement. I read some of them. They weren't wrong, exactly. But they were all doing what photographs do. Failing to hold the thing they were trying to hold. Describing the surface. Missing the current underneath. The current underneath was simpler than any of the analyses. She showed up. Fully. Deliberately. In a room full of history and ceremony and the weight of everything those walls have witnessed over centuries, she showed up and she was present. And the room felt it. And the room responded the way rooms respond to that, when they encounter it, that rarest of things, a person who has decided to truly be where they are. The flowers on the long tables would have been cleared by morning. The candles extinguished. The chairs rearranged. The ballroom returned to its formal resting state, ready for whatever it would be asked to hold next. Outside, the mall would have been ordinary again by 7 a.m. joggers, cyclists, the first tourists of the day arriving with their maps and their expectations. The tiara went back to wherever tiaras go when they aren't carrying the light of a room. The pink gown was, presumably, carefully removed and preserved and stored in the way that things made to last are stored. And the evening became what evenings become. A memory. A photograph. A briefly held brightness, dissolving into the ordinary accumulation of time. But here is what I keep. Not the gown, not the tiara, not the grandeur of the room or the names on the guest list or the military band or the white roses climbing toward gilded ceilings. I keep the older woman outside the barriers, standing alone with no phone in her hand, watching with the attention of someone who already knew what she was about to see. I keep the sound the crowd made. Not screaming. Not theater. The involuntary kind. And I keep the thought that arrived with it, standing there in that room, in that October light that the candles had made warm, watching a woman in pink carry something beautifully and refuse to put it down. Some people make a room remember itself. She walked in, and this one did.